Hello, hello. Welcome to Your Home by Design, the podcast where we talk all about our homes and how they affect our health and well-being. Some episodes we delve deep into the research and some we just chat. I'm Nico, an interior designer and researcher passionate about bringing forward the findings so that you can improve your lifestyle and well-being. Grateful to have you. Let's do this. Hello, hello. Welcome to today's episode. Firstly, before I get started, I just want to point out that as I am recording this, I am looking out the window and there is blue skies and sunshine. It's Friday and it's just, I'm excited for the weekend, for the rest, for the time that I get to spend with my familia. So anyway, I hope wherever you are having a great day as well. So in today's episode, we are going to talk about impulsivity, acting on impulse. Do you ever feel like you make quick decisions about your home? Like you rush the process? Are you impulsive, my friends? Today, let's chat about it. Let's chat about the risks to your home when you act on impulse, how our personal values play into our spaces, how it's important to slow down when making decisions, and we're going to talk about how acting on impulse means you don't have a plan. And throughout the episode, I'm going to share some suggestions on what you can do when you're feeling impulsive. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start with sharing a little story. Years ago, a good friend of mine, decided she wanted to paint her living room. It was something that she had been thinking about for a while. And, she decided that, all right, now's the time. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change the space. And she was so excited to finally do it, to make the change and update the room. She had a really big vision, and a ton of inspiration images that she had compiled. And so first her plan was she was going to have the room painted, and then she was going to do, get a new rug and update some of her furniture and some accessories. She was going to do some lighting. And she was so excited to just get going. And she rushed off to the paint store to choose the color for the walls. Now, if you've ever gone to a paint store to choose paint, you know how it goes. You head to that far corner where there's gleaming white light. The walls are covered with all the paint chips, and you start flipping through the brochures of suggested coordinating colors. And then you just start grabbing at those little colorful pieces of paper. You just grab the ones you gravitate to. Well, my friend pulled hundreds. She was there for hours, just grabbing at every color she liked. And when she got home, she said she was so confused and so overwhelmed by all of the colors. And she didn't even really know where to begin. So when the time came to pick the final color, she just kind of winged it. And it was sort of this process of elimination. It came down to which color did she like the most. And she didn't really factor anything else in. It was really that this was the color she was going to base all of the other decisions on. So the next week, the room was painted, and after it was done, she told me that she literally didn't even love the color. She didn't get the reaction that she was expecting. She sort of felt like, okay, so this is the color that I've chose, and I don't really know how I ended up with this color, but it is what it is. So let's continue on from here. But that feeling of, this is not what I wanted. I said to her too, I said, well, what was your process? Tell me how you went about choosing this color. And she told me what had happened. And then I said, well, did you paint swatches on the wall? Or because a very important thing, side note, if you're choosing paint colors, is you have to have a sample painted on the wall. And I typically have a few of them done on different sides of the room because the way that the light comes in and the way that the color looks is going to change not only throughout the day, but it will look different on different walls. And it's really, really important as you're narrowing down your choices. Of course, you have to factor in many things, but one of them is seeing it in the space. And a funny thing with color is how the other colors respond to it and cause you to feel. And this is called flow. So when you're choosing a color for a space, how does the flow of colors or color respond to the other colors as you move from room to room? And this can be even with light paint colors, this can be with dark, it's just the undertones and how this color, if you can see into another room, how does that color respond to the color in the adjacent room, right? So when I was in design school, my teacher assigned a really fun little color exercise. And this was at the beginning of one of our color courses. And we were given a handful of cards, and each one was a different paint color from a paint company. And we were asked to arrange them and take out the ones that didn't work. So it was like an intuitive exercise. Just look at them and just snag out the ones that you don't think work. And the goal was that we were going to be building a scheme. So I think, let's say we were given 12 cards, and the objective was to choose 8 colors that were going to stay in the scheme and be a different room in the house, and then pull out the other ones that you felt didn't work in these colors. And like I said, it was very intuitive. She wanted to see how we were reacting to the colors. So we were asked to arrange them and take out the ones that didn't work. And some seemed really obvious. They just sort of jumped out at you as this was not going to work. And some were really tricky. You were kind of humming and hawing and really thinking, well, does this work? Does that not work? So the goal of the exercise was to train our eyes to recognize undertones and pairings. And after doing this exercise, I realized that in the past, I had chose paint colors without even considering really how the colors would work with the other colors that were in adjacent rooms, and not considering things like what was already in the space or influencing the space. Like, for instance, a red building across the street, or, a blue-gray carpet. And my point in this story is it's too easy to get fixated on the change and rush the process and make an uninformed decision. It's just too easy to act on impulse because we were carried by an emotion. So what happens when we act on impulse? Well, I'm going to start with the definition of impulse according to the Cambridge Dictionary. So impulse is showing behavior in which you do things suddenly without any planning and without considering the effects they may have. So I think this is especially true when we're making decisions on something in our homes. This can be a purchase, a paint color, which we just talked about, a renovation, or a refresh. And for starters, I just want to clarify that, I'm not talking about spontaneity. Because there's a difference between spontaneity and impulsivity. So today's episode, we are just focusing on impulse. And I think the best indicator of impulse is regret. I think that's how you know if you've acted on impulse versus spontaneity, because impulse is going to cause you feelings of regret. And regret is just so annoying. When we regret making a decision in our homes, you feel it. When you choose to update your home, you want to feel super good about it. You want it to cause you to want to take care of your home and to enjoy being in your your spaces. It's amazing how when we freshen things up, we also feel freshened up. Our outlook on our home and the way that we care for our home feels fresh. It just gives us a sense of renewal, a new perspective, which causes us, like I said, to take more care in how we use the spaces, how the spaces look, from cleanliness to arrangement. And don't you want to have pride in your home, right? Your home should make you feel happy. Okay, so here's where I'm going to bring in some research on this. And I want to talk about some of this in the context of what we all naturally do and the effects that being impulsive has on us. And the reason why I want to bring this to your attention is because I'd like you to slow down the decision making. I'd like you to create spaces that really speak to you. I want you to feel confident when you make a decision. When you spend money and time on updating your home, I want you to have the reward. You want the benefits of creating a special space for you. But before I get into a little research, I just wanted to mention that, there are some amazing rooms that we see on social media. Like, I personally follow amazing designers and room creators. I follow some artists that have carved out their space to reflect them. Some have worked with designers and some have created something really special on their own. But what I see in most of the rooms is authenticity. There's a level of commitment to the design and to the story, to the atmosphere. And you can't have commitment to cohesive change if you act on impulse, because being authentic means you've taken the time to think things through, to speak to you. So the details are considered collectively, and you've factored in your wants and your needs. The spaces I often see are very personal to the occupant. And although I completely can drool sometimes over the design and respect it, it's not something that I would copy, for myself or for a client, because each space is unique and you can create a very unique space for you. You can be inspired or informed by designs that you're seeing, but still create a very authentic and unique space for yourself. You can't rush it. You have to define it before you design it. You got that? Define it before you design it. So research suggests that when we take action on things that honor our values, we feel more satisfied and fulfilled. And if we don't honor our values, it can cause us to feel unsatisfied and discontent. So when you design a space that reflects you, this means you are naturally weaving your values into your home. And I think people don't often associate values with home choices. And there's obvious ways, of course, to this where it's, if you meet somebody and they say, oh, I live off grid, you can say, I would have a good understanding of your values. Or, we have a kitchen a culinary kitchen, and we grow all of our own vegetables. You could say, okay, I get it. I get your values. But there's other ways on a smaller scale that you can do this to align with your values. So to give you a couple of examples of values that you can weave into your space, I'm going to talk about quality, adventure, and friendship. So I just kind of randomly selected 3 values. So for the first one, if your value is quality, and let's say, you decide to get a new area rug for your living room. So you start looking online and you come across a website that you're not super familiar with, but you see some really great prices on some super cool designs. So you get that feeling of like, okay, let's do this. You're excited and you get the sense that, the change is coming. You're enticed by these emotions that you're having. And, you haven't really at this point thought through the design of the rug or what the perfect colors would be for your space, or if you're planning on changing anything else in the room or buying anything else. Because the style and colors of the other things that you might buy or change would impact which rug you choose. But instead, you kind of act on impulse. You make a purchase. So flash forward, the rug arrives and you notice straight away that it's not quite like the picture. The colors aren't quite right. And overall, the quality isn't there. Now, if one of your core values is quality, how do you think this would make you feel? Let down, disappointed, deflated? It would be falling short of how you envisioned and felt it would transform your room and ultimately you. What should you have done different? First, aside from considering what else is going to be changed or updated, you might want to look into the company. What's their ethos? Where are they based? What are their production methods? Do they take pride in their design and the product that they're selling? Does the quality of not only the product, but the service align with your value? If quality is your value, you need to make choices that stand up to this, that make you feel like you've done good. You've made the right choice. You stand by the product. It feels great. It looks great. And you can speak about it with confidence. The next value example I'm going to use is adventure. Let's say you love experiencing new things, from food to travel. And yet when you look at your home, the decor, the design doesn't foster any of this. Perhaps you have some store-bought art that doesn't relate to places you've been. You don't have your dinner table set up to sit and enjoy the food that you love to eat in the style that you love to eat. So, for example, let's say one of the places that you love to travel, they dish everything out on the table at once, and you get to sort of add a little bit onto your plate, and it's this long-winded dinner where, eating is going to take hours. Yet your dinner table is not set up to foster this style of eating. Maybe you even eat in front of your TV. So if you love to travel, and when you're traveling, you love the style, their lifestyle in the ways that they dine, when you're in your favorite country, pay attention and think about ways to recreate those feelings in your home. Right? That lifestyle that you love, this can be done too in such simplistic ways, like with serving dishes, bowls, or even, table linens. It can be done with furniture, like an antique that originated from your favorite country. It's about weaving in your values, and and thinking about art from places that you've traveled, or designing your room uses that foster the lifestyle you love when you travel. So this is really important, because if this is what you love and this is a value of yours, you want your spaces to mirror that back to you, to reinforce what brings you joy. And the last value example I'm going to use is friendship, right? So let's say that friendship is one of your core values. You foster your friendships. You take care of your friendships. But let's say you haven't made choices in your home to welcome friends. Maybe you're feeling too embarrassed to have your friends over because your space doesn't look good. It's unfinished, or it's not tidy. Or do you have enough places to sit to even invite your friends over? Or have you thought through how to host and what you need in order to do that confidently and well, to make your friends feel welcome and at ease, and to create that sense of fun? Have you created a feeling, and ambiance to support connection, right? Because there's a quality to a space that does this. It can feel intimate and inviting. There are deliberate ways that you can honor your value in friendships and reflect that in your home, so that if you create a space to do this, you will want to have your friends over, which will foster your value and bring you joy. So it's important to recognize how your values can be woven into your home and to just slow your roll when acting on impulse, just to check in and see if it's an opportunity to layer in some values before making a rash decision. And something else to consider when you're feeling like impulse is taking over is something that behavioral scientists recognize. And this is the fact that we often go for immediate rewards over delayed. So if you're craving sudden change, just know that, it's what we naturally gravitate to. And in that moment, just remind yourself that this is what's happening and consider delaying the reward. Because the goal isn't quick rewards. When you're designing a space that reflects you and that fosters your health and your well-being, it's about designing a space for you, not something that's quick, not, it's about taking the time and considering everything that you need your space to be. The last thing I want to point out on the research front is we are all influenced constantly by many things. Things like cultural expectations can affect decision-making. And the research even suggests that social influences can affect our ability to make optimal choices. So again, I just want to reiterate, just slowing the process down and really recognizing when you're feeling impulsive and trying to change that momentum to it's okay to take more time. It's okay to think about it. It's okay to look at what's influencing me. And it's okay to pay attention to my values and how I need my space to reflect my ideal lifestyle, who I am. And resisting that urge to act on impulse. When you act on impulse, you don't have a plan. You've rushed the process and you've missed the mark. And interior design is really all about planning. It's all about making an informed decision. And I know that it doesn't always sound fun. It doesn't sound enticing. And it probably sounds like a lot of work. But let's be honest, would you rather act on impulse and regret it or wait and plan and make the right choices? Because your home is about a big picture, and that big picture has overlapping elements. I often use the analogy of a puzzle. And I actually have an upcoming episode that's called Planet Like a Puzzle. And I talk about how your home is like a puzzle where each piece creates a whole and each one should be considered with the big picture in mind. Now, you can't decide on the pieces if you don't know the picture. And what happens if you have acted on impulse and have not established the big picture? You have a bunch of mismatched pieces that don't fit. So for your home, this might look like random finishes in your house, mismatched random finishes, doorknobs that don't match, paint colors that don't flow, weird flooring transitions because you've replaced one floor ahead of time and not considered that you might replace the other floor a year later, incorrect furniture arrangements, certain things feeling almost hodgepodge and you haven't made these choices based on your values, and that's felt because it's not in line with the things that are important to you. The reason why I think it's really important to talk about being impulsive as it relates to our home is because being impulsive, if you haven't created the big picture and factored things in, will leave you regretting decisions that you've made. And the key here is to understand that when you should be impulsive and when you should not. And even that takes consideration. Because let's say you are at a brocante in France. And I use this because I would do anything to be doing that. But basically like an antique market. And let's say you spot something that you absolutely fall for. So you have to sort of, before you buy it, you would have to consider whether the object would serve you, right? If you could use it or display it, or if you had a spot for it. See, so even in this case, you would have to consider these things. You would have to have, before you were spontaneous in this purchase, right? Even though you had not specifically planned to look for something like that, it grabbed your attention in the moment, but you still approached it with some consideration. Where we would say being impulsive would be bad in this scenario would be if something grabbed your attention and you had no use for it, no need for it, and it didn't even work with your decor. So now you put this random, useless thing in the wrong spot and it never looks right. It's never used or appreciated, and it conflicts with your style and your atmosphere. Then that would be perhaps something you would regret, because you would look at it and say, why the heck did I buy this thing? And what this comes down to is the difference between impulsiveness and spontaneous. Right. And I think the common way to find out, and again, as I've mentioned, is regret. What's the feeling that you have after? How can I learn from this if I've approached things being too impulsive? Because often if we make a quick change to our home and we regret that change, then we have acted on impulse, like my dear friend who painted, then hated. So if you're someone who's prone to impulsive behavior, and some of us are, we're just more prone than others, which I think you would probably know based on your life. So if you think you tend to be an impulsive person, then I think you just have to have this on your radar, right? If you know, then you can take action. You can create a little action plan. It may look like giving yourself a certain amount of time when making a decision before you act on it. And some decisions have more significance than others, like tearing down a wall versus buying new plates. There's a big difference there on the regret if you do act on impulse. Some decisions will need more time and more planning. And I often say when you're making a decision, you should write down the pros and cons and weigh the options. And of course, a major consideration is to factor in how it relates to the rest of your home and the choices that will either be coming up or that you have already made. I think we need to be creating homes and spaces that ultimately bring us joy, that give us a sense of pride in what we have created, that mirror back our life stories, inspire, reflect, motivate. And the last thing any of us wants to feel is regret. Regret from a choice you've made, because you had the opportunity to make a good choice, but you got sucked into impulsivity that you didn't take the chance to take care of your well-being. So today, I encourage you to just slow down. Take a deep breath and think it through. Make sure you know without a doubt that the choice you're making is the right one. Revisit your decisions several times and make sure you don't just have one piece of the puzzle chosen. Thanks for listening to today's episode.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the Support the Show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.